Hello, everybody. My name is Mirko Novakovic. I am co-founder and CEO of Dash Zero, and welcome to Code Red. Code, because we are talking about code, and red stands for requests, errors, and duration, the core metrics of observability. On this podcast, you will hear from leaders around our industry about what they are building, what's next in observability, and what you can do today to avoid your next outage.
Today, my guest is Stephen Whitworth. Stephen is the co-founder and CEO of Incident.io, an incident management platform used by engineering teams at companies like Netflix, Airbnb, and OpenAI. And by the way, also at Dash Zero. Before Incident.io, he led engineering teams at Monzo and co-founded fraud detection startup Revelin. Excited to have you here. Welcome to Code Red.
Yeah, pleasure to be here, Mirko. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this will be an interesting conversation in the context of AI and everything what's happening. But I always start my question with the first question. It's what was your biggest Code Red moment in your career?
Yes, I remember it like it was yesterday. So I guess my background was like I was self-taught coding. So I kind of started my career off as a data analyst and then worked my way into data science. And what that meant was like I was building these kind of models of like how we would like predict a taxi fare or something. And I was doing it in these like, R and Starter and MATLAB and all this stuff. And I kind of wanted to get that into the product somehow. So I sort of taught myself enough Go to be able to like load in some of these weights into like a model and a service in the system. And I had someone that was like helping me kind of do all of that. So like I was super excited, about to like integrate this, first production deploy ever. And it turns out that like I ended up causing this massive outage off the back of it. So it was this like weird interaction with kind of the queuing system we used, which meant that we like every time the service booted up, it would try and create like a new subscriber to this topic, and then it would immediately crash and then create another different one. So I basically overloaded our messaging cluster in like 10 seconds, which was like global outage. I was obviously mortified because, this is like literally the first production, deployment I've ever made in my life. And I genuinely thought I was going to get fired because I had no idea about sort of blameless postmortems and all of this sort of side of the world. So I was like, right, I had a good 2 weeks, time to pack up my stuff. But ultimately, I guess it was my first introduction, to incidents, and it shaped that like, oh, you can actually use these as a chance to sort of protect against stuff going wrong and improve, which was, I guess sort of a stressful moment, but like a good learning moment nonetheless.
Yeah, I can see that. But everyone who has been in that situation knows how it feels, right?
Yeah, and they start sweating across here. Yeah,
exactly. And then you came, I guess, you came up with the idea of Incident.io while being at Monzo.
Yes, exactly. So we had sort of internal tooling at Monzo, which was built by my co-founder Chris, and they later open sourced it, and it was kind of the conflation between, hey, I've been woken up to deal with these issues throughout my career, and the best that we have in the market is sort of something that wakes you up, but then there's kind of no software after that point. And then Chris had solved that problem internally for Monzo. They'd open sourced it, and there were lots of other companies using sort of that version of things. So it was like, oh, right, this is such a big problem. The status quo kind of sucks. People seem to love whatever Chris has built. Like, let's go and build the company that sort of stands behind that. So that was us about 4.5 years ago.
Yeah, nice. And pretty successful so far. So congrats. And let's a little bit deep dive into that. What's the difference between an on-call system and an incident response system? Because I think most people know from the past systems like PagerDuty or Opsgenie and these systems, which were, as you said, more or less systems where you can configure who to wake up when, and then you get a call, right? But then you are kind of stuck. So what's the difference between those system and Incident.io, and which part of the process are you taking care of?
For most companies in the world that are running software in production, they have some kind of on-call tooling which integrates backwards into telemetry systems. And, essentially there'll be alerts running, they'll check, is the CPU level of this pod okay? And if it goes above a certain level, fire off an alert, hit the on-call provider that contains some scheduling of who's on call for what, and then you get woken up. The problem is like that's only just one part of the entire workflow that kicks off from that point. So yes, you need to be woken up to tell you that there's a problem, but then there's all the stuff that you have to do after that. So, for example, what is broken? How do you know what's broken? That usually looks like engineers diving into Datadog, deployment systems, many of those things. It's like, what else does this affect? That then is kind of you tracing upstream and downstream dependence, trying to group different alerts into things, which customers are affected. You may have one customer affected or all of your customers and everywhere in between. How do you communicate with them? There's sort of many other questions that follow on after something's wrong, and I like to think of us as sort of helping take you the entire life cycle of that. So to me, that is what's broken, who needs to know about it, how might you fix it, and we can talk about some of the AI stuff a little bit later, and then ultimately, how do you stop it happening again? So what that looks like in practice is we build software that integrates into places where people are already solving these sorts of issues. So Slack and Teams, we're also in places like Zoom and Google Meet. We help run the life cycle of your incident. So you have often sort of a process that you want to run, which might be, hey, if it's one of our top 10 customers affected, please page Mirko, something like that. The state of art for that, right now is usually a Notion document and some hope. We build the sort of software that makes sure that always happens. We then have products that do customer communications. So folks like OpenAI, Square, etc., use our status page to communicate with their customers when things go wrong. We then help at the end of the issue. So once you put the fire out, you'd quite like to stop it happening again. So we kind of collate all of the different information and timeline from what we've been helping you solve. So this is transcripts from Zoom calls, it's deployments from GitHub, it is emails that you sent out and were received by customers, and we put together that to avoid a staff engineer spending 2 days writing this thing together. And then we connect that back into where work actually gets done in your organization. So Linear, GitHub, Jira, wherever you want to do it, with the idea being that like we can help you close the loop between bad thing happened, help you respond faster, help you stop it happening again. So this is, I guess, kind of a new-ish thing in that, really there's only been folks sort of like us and our competitors doing this, I'd say, for about the last 4 or so years. To me, it sort of felt like the obvious continuation of like, well, yeah, you need to be woken up, but what about actually fixing the problem? So, to me, they're not really over time going to be viewed as like very different products or categories. It's kind of just all part of the same thing. So part of our business is, doing on call, which is what folks already have usually. And then a lot of this is also going in and replacing manual process or some home built internal tool that kind of does a little bit of what we do, but is being maintained by someone that's stressed out and all of the rest.
Yeah, it's interesting that that process was never really covered, right? If you think about it, because it's such an important process, and especially, I mean, I think when we spoke last time, you told me like you kind of solved the multiplayer game compared to a lot of the other tools are more like single player, right? Because when an incident happens, I know it also from my times when I was an engineer. Normally, a lot of people get involved, right? Because it's not a single person who can fix it. You have to inform people, so it's really multiplayer, and you do that too, right? You, and not only in Slack, but you have an overview of what's happening at in which point in time. I saw you have like a board where you can see in which stage of the process the incident is. So it's really about bringing a team together and let them work on the incident together.
Yeah, 100%. I think like a really nice characterization of that is like, it's like the CTO or the CEO turns up on the Zoom call and then immediately sort of like the atmosphere changes. And like, the reason that person is usually turning up on that call is not because they're like fixing the issue. They just want to know that the thing is being handled reasonably well. And, in the prior world, you sort of like jump on the call, distract a lot of people, maybe slow down the response. we've built Scribe, which sort of sits in your Google Meet and your Zoom calls, does transcription of the call, but also then uses AI to sort of pull out key moments, what's being worked on, who's working on what. And in reality, like that's actually what the CTO wants. They just want to know, like, oh, Mirko's on it. Okay, cool. We're doing this thing. Someone's taking care of customer comms. And to me, it's just a really nice example of like, there's many different groups of people, from engineering leaders to ICs to customer support folks to legal people that need to be involved, especially in more complicated incidents. And it's a mixture of like, they're sort of either just observing, because, for example, if I'm a customer support agent, I don't need to drive that incident, but I kind of want to know how to respond to people when they're asking. If I'm a CTO, I want to know that we're taking care of it, but I'm not going to fix it. So there's all these sorts of different groups of people, and they have slightly different intentions. And we're trying to build a software that speaks to all of them, not just this like single player, super nerdy SRE experience. Like that's cool. There's lots of stuff out there, but ultimately, our observation from all meeting at a bank in the UK is like, yeah, when software in banks go wrong, it tends to affect quite a lot of other places apart from the engineering organization. So you need software that sort of handles that and can speak to it as well. So yeah, it's a bit of a diverse group.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'm an observability vendor, so let's talk a little bit how those tools play together, right? Because if you are in that incident, you need a lot of information, right? You need the information. You just mentioned it, right? Could be the CPU load of a pod is too high. It could be some code was deployed and it's not working anymore. So do you have integrations in those tools, and you pull data for the incident out of those tools, or how does it work?
I think of sort of both of these tools having like the ultimate shared goal of like reliability of software, and you can kind of use them together to help get you more out of it. So, for example, if we're saying in the kind of incident spectrum, I would say that like observability tools give you signals on what might be broken, and then the incident side of the world tells you sort of who, what, when, and gives you more like organizational, broader context. Right now, they feel like a little disconnected, in that, engineers are often like manually stitching these things together. And sort of outside of tools like us, it's all just, the incident response side is just manual process and people kind of gluing things together in Slack. So, in terms of how we integrate, so we have products like AI SRE that use telemetry as a source of information. So what AI SRE does is, in the first 15, 20 minutes of an incident, aims to pull together and triage across many different data sources. So, metrics in your telemetry provider. We have past sort of incidents that we have access to. We have customer support tickets and inbound. So I guess we are sort of viewing telemetry as like one of many things that you might need to look at during an incident, but certainly an important one. And then, we don't want to be an observability company. Like we have no ambition to go do that. It's not a strength of the company. And, ultimately we sort of steer clear from that. So what that means is that we actually integrate with these observability and telemetry companies a bit more like how a human would interact with these products, which is sort of exploration versus like raw ingestion of data. So, ultimately, like that's how we choose to integrate, is sort of understand how humans use these systems by analyzing query logs and dashboards, and essentially try to understand like what things should we trust. We then in incidents aim to browse these systems to help sort of, if we can't find the exact needle in the haystack, sort of find which part of the haystack they should be looking in. And then ultimately, I think over time, I would love to make that a bit more bidirectional. So for example, like we have code analysis abilities, we have postmortems, so we can tell what improvements people want to make. And a large time is like, we actually didn't have the observability or like the tracking to be able to catch this particular thing. And we can talk about how agents work together. Like, I'm not sure anyone really knows at this point, but like, I would love to be in a world where like, how can I help make observability platforms more useful based off of like the gaps that people have or the risks that they saw. Because, I sort of see us starting and ending at the area of like there might be something wrong, and sort of taking you through to helping resolve that issue. But there's many uses for like telemetry and observability sort of outside of that. And I want to be like good friends with people that do that versus ultimately treading on each other's toes a bit too much, I guess.
Yeah. And how do you integrate with those tools? Using an MCP server, APIs, or when you say looking at the dashboard, are you actually logging into the tool with an agent and looking at a concrete dashboard, or how does it work?
Yes, MCP right now. And ultimately there's, for example, it's very helpful also to pull like visual aspects of things, and people are very used to looking at graphs. So we'll also do the other approach that you mentioned as well. A lot of this stuff is moving quite fast, and for example, there's also a world where I imagine some of the incumbent sort of telemetry providers would start to charge for this. So there's also like separate ways that you could choose to integrate and agreements that we could have with people. So it's it's all moving very, very quickly. So we're sort of building with what we have at the moment. But like if I just pick like an internal example, like as we deploy AI internally inside our company, we're building on top of Claude's like co-work plugins. And I think they released that 6 days ago. So it's like, okay, well, that we're not doing sort of years worth of experience of how we do it. I think there's a lot of just like figuring this out as we go along.
We did exactly the same. So our internal Agent Zero platform, we also went on the coworker platform, and it's amazing, right? It's also pretty fast. The way they do it, like, is really cool. But yeah, I agree. It's moving very fast, and nobody really knows where it's going, right? It's just improving very quickly, right? So that's something that's really interesting. If you look back, I don't know when the last cloud model was released in November, December, that changed a lot. And then since then, it feels like a year, but it's only 6 weeks, right? But so many things have changed, and yeah, that's challenging, but it's also really interesting and fun, right, to work in this time.
100%. I think the world has never been more uncertain. I was talking about it with my co-founder. So you're seeing companies like Anthropic start to move into the sort of like, I guess, come up the stack and go and do direct applications. And it was sort of quite obvious that they would do things like coding, in that feels like quite a closed loop system. There's a lot of money being spent on it. You can train and validate whether this thing you generated is actually correct in some mechanic. But they're now moving up to do things like legal. So there's then, competitors like Harvey and Legora. And if you go look at the release notes for Opus 4.6, there's then a benchmark on OpenRCA, which is a benchmark you use for root cause analysis. So there's a world where it's like, oh, maybe Anthropic and the LLMs come into the observability space in some mechanic, and that would, I think, change quite a lot. And there's a worldview where like, okay, maybe we just all go live in a hut in the forest somewhere, and there is no software anymore or anything like that. I don't think that's going to happen. It's actually sort of good, I think, for the industry for these models to ingest more around things like telemetry, versus just understanding, say, code, because code is ultimately just run in production, and telemetry is the stuff that you use to maintain that. But I basically don't know what it's going to look like in a year from now, whether they'll have moved into it, whether the models will be much smarter at that, what that means for us. But that means it's fun, and there's many different outcomes we could sort of go shape and achieve versus, oh, well, yeah, we've been building on cloud for the last 8 years, and sure, makes it a good time to be alive.
Absolutely, but it's also, I mean, I'm really thinking about the same thing, right? Is what will be taken over by these, I call them platforms, right? AI platforms like Claude, and will the user be there then, right? Also for you or for me, will you troubleshoot your incident in Claude, or will you do it still in Incident.io? Will you look at dashboards inside of Dash Zero, or will it? I mean, there are now these application integrations, MCP with providing UI elements, right? So we can even do things and send charts, etc., back to Claude. And it's not our environment, but I, for example, when we use HubSpot internally for CRM, I connected HubSpot to Claude, it's actually so good, right? You can ask questions like, okay, give me a deal analysis of the past 2 weeks, and then it gets all the data. And the interesting part, like how do agents work together? Then it calls a coding agent to build a dashboard for the result, and then you get a really nice dashboard where you can drill into all the deals by AE and everything. So it's kind of amazing if you see the result and compared to what you can do actually inside of the tool, which is not such a nice dashboarding experience. So I'm using it in Claude now, right? So that's a change that I'm already seeing for myself.
100%. I think, I mean, like we sort of have like the external application of this of how do we want to go deliver things to our customers, but then we have the internal, which is how do we want to run the company. Um, if I've sort of picked two products that are quite different right now, like sort of Salesforce and Linear. So Linear has like quickly adapted to this shift, has built in agents as a first class citizen into the platform, and is essentially becoming the place where like we build and ship product. And it is like a multiplayer experience that allows people to collaborate on what is inherently a multiplayer kind of coordination problem. And I just don't see them going anywhere. I don't want to have a single player experience inside Claude for how we develop software and ship it across teams. I want sort of, to see the delegation and like, Cursor is working on this thing and Lawrence is working on this other thing. So I think if sort of companies move quickly and they solve this coordination problem, I think that means that like, you're not going to get, say, uh, Claude is not going to become a wrapper, I guess, for your interaction model. If I think about Salesforce, I mean, before Claude, people were using tools like Scratchpad to avoid having to input deals into Salesforce directly. And that to me, there feels like there's some fragility there, which is like you're going to increasingly be used as a database. And I think you may also means that like more and more interaction might happen outside of you. And I basically can't tell right now if that's just because I think that more single player experiences may just move to happening in Claude and tools like that, and more multiplayer stuff I think will be harder and requires applications to go solve it. But it also might be a function of like how quickly a company's adapting. So yeah, I think it's a tricky one from that perspective. And I guess just from like our product's view on the world, like we were honestly never too precious about like you using our dashboard or anything like that. Like, our first product was like this cute Slack bot that you like deployed into your Slack workspace. You did /incident, it created a Slack channel, and there was like a nice web dashboard that had some stuff, but it wasn't that useful. Over time, we've made that more and more useful, but like the kind of fundamental product principle that we've operated with is just like be where the people are organically solving the problem, which has meant that, right, we build bots that sit inside your Zoom calls. And now with AI SRE, like we sit inside Claude, like Claude Code specifically. I mean, it's like we don't actually really care as long as, ultimately what we want to help drive is that workflow from sort of symptom to resolution to improvement. But we know that there is like 15 different tools that are used throughout that process, and we kind of don't care about being the one dashboard that means you have to log into. We just want to be able to see it, understand it, and then kind of ultimately drive through that workflow. So yeah, I think it makes it probably a little bit easier for us to like adapt to the changing times, I guess.
Yeah, but that also means you are very focused on user experience, right? I think that's the big difference between, I mean, I don't want to blame Salesforce or HubSpot, but whenever I use those tools, it doesn't feel really nice, right? As you said, right? Putting in a deal, etc., feels a little bit clunky. The user experience, creating dashboards doesn't feel so nice. Where, for example, a Linear, it's a really nice user experience, right? If you are also inside of the product, you like to use it. It's easy to use. It's modern. It's fun, right? So, and the same as you described, if you are working in an incident, user experience also mean be there where the user is, right? And they are in Slack. They use Slack for it. So why not naturally integrate into where users already have been, right? So I think that's a big change right now, that you really have to care about user experience, right? And understand where users are, how do they use products, and make it a fun experience, right? I don't think that in the future, especially with AI, you will be able to compete if your user experience sucks, right? I think that's just not working anymore.
Yeah, 100% agree. The way we always thought about it is like we solve a problem where seconds and minutes matter. So if we have to make you click through different forms, or the latency is like 2 seconds to save anything, like for, one of our customers that is, processing massive amounts of payments, if that isn't working, we're literally talking like hundreds of dollars we might have lost in like a single back end call. So make it fast, make it enjoyable. And, I'm not going to pretend that people love incidents. It's stressful, all of that side of the world, but like we would at least to like sort of try and make it fun and delightful. Otherwise it would just be a miserable time, miserable time for everyone. So, do as much as we can to add in these little pieces of delight into the product. As software gets cheaper to build, I think there will still be like massive returns to like taste and intuition and design, which weren't really there before.
Yeah, I agree. And let's talk a little bit about the AI SRE agents. You mentioned it, right? And it's part of your product. I looked at it. You have some cool feature, as you said, like scribe the transcripts and putting it into it. But my feeling is at the moment there are, I don't know, 100 AI SRE agents at least that spun up in the last 6 months. And I always say we also have one. The moat is also not so big, right? Most people have a wrapper around Claude and then some agent platform, and then you feed it with some data. I mean, we can talk about that. That's probably the hardest part, to give the agent the right data, the right context, everything. But overall, it looks like there are hundreds of AI SRE agents. I'm asking myself, how will that market evolve, right? Could be part of like the incident response kind of category. Also, I mean, there was this category of AI ops, which was a little bit similar, right? It was about looking at a lot of different incidents, grouping them together and trying to figure out what's happening. So I think it makes sense that these AI ops, incident management, SRE tools could be in your category, right? It could be a separate category. It could be part of the observability tools. So it's kind of hard to, or as you said, could be that Claude Anthropic is moving into that space and it will be part of those platforms, right? And it could be they will be everywhere, right? Who knows? So what is your perspective? I mean, you moved into that space probably because you saw AI and it makes sense, right? Helping. I'm looking at an incident. Somebody wakes me up at 4 a.m. in the morning. I already get a summary from my AI tool, what if it's important or not and where to look at. And then it helps me navigate and fix, right? I mean, that makes sense. So I can see why it's in the incident response category.
Yeah, I think the first few products we released were very focused on like helping you run the process of an incident really well. So think communication, coordination, all of that side of things. And that was useful and it was net positive on the status quo, because, that had only the existing providers only really solved like on call. So we went and then did the rest. However, that leaves a big elephant in the room, which is like you're sort of giving me a container to solve problems efficiently in, but you're not actually helping me solve this specific problem and why it happened. And that was really like where we saw the rest of the opportunity in this instance was like, okay, well, given that we have built this place where people congregate and solve problems, it feels like we have a sort of strong right to like put something there that is, does a good job at actually helping you solve that. And specifically, for us, that looks like helping people from the like alert and incident workflow, both from like understanding what caused it, what they should do next, in some circumstances, drafting fixes, pull requests, things like that, but much broader kind of, just agentic capabilities. Like you can just search throughout your entire incident history to say, hey, have we ever seen something like this before? Or who, for issues like this, who do we usually page? And things like that, that are a bit more sort of widely connected. I think there's sort of two views of the world. Like one is, observability companies end up doing this really, really well. And I would, if I sort of steel man like the Datadog argument or something like that, it would be actually incidents are primarily a technical thing. And as a result, like the people with the richest telemetry data and the ability to build, say, custom models over that telemetry data above and beyond what is publicly available through LLMs are going to have some kind of, big benefit on accuracy and the ability to do that. And people will sort of go, hey, well, I already pay these providers lots of money. What's another, $100,000, whatever you choose to spend on it. And then they returns sort of go to them. And you can see this with, they're also building on-call tools and incident response tools and all that side of the world. So it's right, that's one view of the world. I'd say the second one is that, we just remain as an on-call process related thing. And it turns out that AI sort of ends up wrapping us in some regards. So you're seeing some of these companies move towards AI for production. So you can just interact with prod through these tools, which to me feels a little bit more like a specialized Claude. And that I think presupposes that you don't want Claude to do everything and you'd be happy to have different versions of different, more specialized versions of these models. I feel like I'm not seeing that's how people work right now, in that in reality for single player use, I think people are sort of gravitating towards these models that have a lot more context. And ultimately, the more potent application of sort of AI for production, I still think is in driving reliability and incident response and alerting. So maybe a third view of the world would be the people that sort of shift towards and acknowledge software reliability being the end game for this are the ones that will reap the rewards of it. And I think that's the shift that we are, that we will make. We don't just want to do on-call. We don't want to be a workflow automation tool. We view it as necessary and important. But ultimately, if I think about what drives reliability, it is detecting issues when you have them, responding as fast as possible when you do, and preventing them so they stop happening in future. And I think there's just a much wider suite of products that you can go build that sort of threads all of those problems together. And I think, especially as we go into sort of enterprise customers, this is such a fragmented group of tools. People may have Datadog and Splunk and Grafana and all of these different things. And in reality, a lot of these products, they don't have that much of a strong incentive to build great integrations with each of them. Whereas we are sort of a bit more like Switzerland in this regard. We want to be friends with them. We want to make everything work together. So I guess I would view us in that world as an investment that helps you get a lot more out of the many other tools that you are also investing in. And that might mean that we end up taking some dollars from the amount of metrics that you might plug into telemetry systems, or it means you can get rid of a bunch of users in ServiceNow. Who knows? I think, maybe a last comment is then around the AI ops and on-call and all of this stuff. Our goal is basically to collapse all of this down into just a reliability platform. There should not be a separate tool that you need for aggregating alerts and denoising them, and then a separate one to page people, and then a separate one to go wake people up. That is all one long workflow, which I think operates and gets better off the same data. So you should go and just sort of build towards that vision, at least in my opinion. That said, I'm super open to the fact that hey, it might be that your AI SRE is way better than ours for some reason, and that sucks, but that's life. I want to make sure that people can integrate those systems and operate them effectively on our platform. If you think about Linear could say, hey, well, we're building a coding agent and we don't want Cursor and we don't want any of these other people interacting, because this is how product gets developed on Linear, and this is our space. It's no, actually, you can be sort of the container and the platform on which this work happens. And there's going to be 10 to 100x more software. Linear is making a really smart bet by making it easy for you to bring in that 10 to 100x multiplier and do it on their platform. And I think that's how we approach things as well, which is we want this to be a bit more composable. We want people to be able to bring agents to us, and if they're helping people detect problems, fix them, or stop them happening again, then there should be like natural integration points for them. And then obviously there's agents that we need to speak to on the -0 side and all of that side of the world, and we're still honestly just figuring out how all of that works right now. But I think yeah, a few different ways the world can end up, but obviously wouldn't be doing this company if I didn't think mine was the best. So trying our
Absolutely.
best.
Absolutely. So my last question would be a prediction. When do you think will be the time that an incident opens and you will automatically fix it? So do the full process automatically with AI.
Good question. I'd say we can do that right now, but dangerously. In that, we can draft the fix, and we are one sort of like auto merge away from you doing that, or we could just push to master. Um, I think that in order to do it safely, a bunch of stuff is going to have to change. For example, like code, like actually typing the characters on the keyboard used to be the bottleneck in the software development lifecycle. It's like, what should we build? And then once we know what we're building, it just takes time to build it. That isn't true anymore, and that's become not true in a very short period of time, which means that now you're seeing it's like, oh well, what's next after that? Oh, it's code review, and now you're seeing companies just abandon code review. They're like, oh, well, you can just push straight to master. You can request a review if you'd like, but we don't need to have it happen anymore. You're then also seeing tools that sort of assist in code review. So we use a tool called Depth Burst, which we really like a lot. This is for sort of security, analysis. And there'll be many others like that I think say, hey, there's a lot more software, but we're going to do a pass on what changes you might need to care about. So I think potentially there's like a low risk stuff can just go in straight away. Stuff that gets flagged has to get a human review. And then I think the next bottleneck after that will then be like, it really doesn't feel like the way that we've actually deployed software has changed that much. Like, yeah, sure, now we use Kubernetes and things like that, but if you're talking about like how the snowflakes and the metas of the world run, they have cell-based architectures with like very progressive deployments where there's feedback systems on rollouts, and that's just really hard for companies like mine to go and build the like mechanics required to go do that. I think if more companies had more things that looked like that, then I would definitely feel a lot safer sort of rolling out changes because you know that the blast radius is limited. So yes, I think ultimately we're going to do our best jobs on like trying to provide as accurate predictions as possible, but I'm just like there will be an upper limit to how accurate those can be, and like I think the next most useful thing is for us to be able to make the blast radius of when we get that wrong smaller, because for most people it's either switch on a feature flag or it's turn it on for everyone. And it feels like you want some kind of self-testing or like, oh, I rolled it out in prod. I didn't see any errors, roll it out further. So that was a long way of not giving you an answer. The short answer would be we can do it now, but it would stress me out. The longer answer is in order to not be stressed out, I think a bunch of new things need to be built. And it'd be nice if those 100 AI SRE startups could go focus on that instead. But hey, this is where we are. There'll be enough startups, I think, focused on all parts of this for us to go around. But yeah, I'm interested. Like, what do you think? Like, you must sort of see, I guess, the other side of things.
No, I would totally agree with you. I don't think that we are ready yet, right? It's like, I don't know, going with an autopilot on the street, but you can crash everywhere, right? So it doesn't feel safe, even if it's 98% correct or 99%. That last 1% is horrible, right? And I like the way you think about it, right? We need to have a lot of safeguards, maybe different architectures to reduce the blast radius and also roll back automatically and stuff like that, right? So I totally agree. I think we are not there yet, but I can see that it's coming quickly. I do think
100%.
that we are not years away, right? I don't think so.
I agree with you. I think the unfortunate thing is that robots are always held to much higher standards than humans are. The classic self-driving thing is like tens of thousands of people die every year in the US from car accidents, and if you have sort of a Waymo shunt the back of another car, it's front page news. And I think exactly the same. basically can't fight human nature. That's just how it's going to be. I think that is exactly the same as how people interpret things like AI SREs, which is it's fine, until it gives you a single wrong answer, and then the trust is gone, and then you scrutinize every single thing this thing says. And I think the unfortunate reality is there will be, unless you can get to a high enough level of accuracy, the things that you can be trusted to go do will be very, very low. Basically, that drives the right incentives, which is make it as accurate as humanly possible. But I think honestly, that's the key product challenge for a lot of the people in this space right now is you can probably get to a point where you're I've seen case studies of competitors that are hitting, say, 90% root cause accuracy. That's really good. Humans would find this thing quite challenging to do as well. However, I think it's very much like a product and a UX problem of okay, in that final 10%, how do I not be confidently wrong or get into the uncanny valley of cool, you just missed out some incredibly obvious thing, and now I can't trust anything that you say, and we go all the way back down to the bottom as well. So it's yeah, it's tough, and I think that's the thing that's holding this bit of the field back right now.
Stephen, thank you. This was a great conversation. Thanks for joining me on this call, and I wish you all the success for the future.
Thank you, Mirko. It's been a pleasure. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. I'm always sharing new insights and insider knowledge about observability on LinkedIn. You can follow me there for more. The podcast is produced by Zero. We make observability easy for every developer.